Nothing finishes off a room like crown molding. It almost doesn't seem complete without it. Not only does it provide an elegant transition from the walls to the ceiling, but it's literally become the benchmark of quality in today's homes. The beauty of crown molding comes from its projecting profile, but that's also what makes it challenging to cut and install. In this video, we're going to take the mystery out of cutting and installing crown molding. We'll take a look at the 3 steps to completing any room with crown mold: prepping the room, cutting the crown, and hanging it. Now let's get started. Now that we've got everything cleared out of the room, we're ready to get down to business. Now when you go to buy your crown molding, you're going to have to make 2 different decisions. The first one is, what type of crown am I going to use? There are 3 options. The first would be a composition product called MDF. The second would be finger joint pine. Both of those are for paint grade. And then the third is going to be stain grade crown made out of solid lumber. Second decision you've got to make is just how big. Now, proportions are important when you're working with moldings. If I'm working in a room that has 8-foot ceilings, I probably would go for between a 3 and a 4-inch crown mold. If I have 9-foot ceilings, I would say between 4 and 5-inch. And if I'm working in a room with tall ceilings, say 10 foot and above, I'd go with a 5-inch crown mold and maybe combine it with some other molding like a piece of baseboard for a built-up look. That's going to be the most efficient way that you can get things done. It's easier to cut 2 small pieces instead of one really, really big piece of molding. Now, you're also going to need to know just how much molding you're going to buy, and you want to take careful measurements because molding is expensive. So I would start out by measuring every wall in the room. And I actually measure it down at the floor because that's just easier. Okay, this wall was 13 foot 6. I would round that up to 14 foot and then measure the other walls in the room, add all that together and add about 10% for waste. Now, the next thing that I like to do, and this really saves a lot of trouble, is to prime the molding and put at least 1 coat of enamel on it. And even if I was staining the molding, I'd still try to stain it and put 1 coat of sealer on it because it just saves you a lot of work. Now, we've already got our crown molding primed and 1 coat of enamel on, so we're ready to get to work. Let's go to the saw. If you've ever tried to cut crown molding, you know it can be a real mystery. When I cut baseboard, I stand it up against the fence of the saw and it's supported tight against the fence of the saw. When I cut casing trim, it fits down tight on the bed of the saw. Again, it's supported the whole time I'm making the cut. But crown molding doesn't fit tight against the fence or the base. It sits in between, and as you can see, it can move around a little bit. All it takes is a little bit of movement to dramatically change the cut, and what that means is I'm not going to get an accurate joint. So what the Crown Pro does for me is provide a solid surface where I'm going to be holding the molding in exactly the same position every time. That means I'm going to get accurate cuts and great results. Now, to use the Crown Pro, I only need to know 2 things. The spring angle that the molding is designed to be installed at, and here's what that means. What angle is the molding supposed to sit at between the wall and the ceiling? And then the second thing that I need to know is, am I making a left or right hand inside cut and a left or right hand outside cut? Now let's take a look at how we determine that spring angle. We'll put one side of our angle finder against the back of the molding and the other side against the bottom edge of the molding. Now the bottom edge of the molding is usually going to be the most decorative edge. I'm just going to tighten it up and read right here, that's 38 degrees. Most of the crown molding that you'll work with will be 38 degree crown molding. Now that we've determined our spring angle is 38 degrees, we just need to set the Crown Pro to 38 degrees. And here's how we do that. On the back side, there's a gauge. All I need to do is loosen this knob, adjust it to 38 degrees, tighten the knob back up, and I'm ready to go. Now that the Crown Pro's set, let's talk about making cuts. Almost all the cuts that you make will either be an inside corner or an outside corner. And every inside corner and outside corner have both a left and a right hand cut. The first thing that you need to know is the molding has to sit in the jig the same every time. And what you want to do is put the top edge of the molding right down here in the jig like this. First, let's take a look at how to make a left hand cut. Right now we're set up to make a left hand cut. Now, for a left hand cut, the Crown Pro is going to be on the right hand side of the saw blade. When you're using a miter saw, it's never a good idea to be cross-armed like that. That's really dangerous. So it can also help you remember which way you're cutting by remembering that to make a left-hand cut, I'm going to hold the molding with my right hand and operate the saw with my left hand. Now, to make a right-hand cut, I move the Crown Pro over to the other side of the saw. I'm going to position the molding like this and operate the saw with my right hand. Now, for an inside cut, the blade is always going to line up with the Crown Pro. To make an outside cut, the blade's going to be swung away from the Crown Pro. That's really all you need to know. Now, don't worry about remembering all this because we're going to keep talking about it as we go through the video. And another thing, they've added these stickers right here which show you the correct positioning of the material. Again, don't worry, we're going to keep talking about it and you'll understand it. Well, by now I'm sure you're just about ready to start putting up some crown molding, but we need to do a little bit of planning before we get started. In every room you want to have a plan of how you're going to install, what order you're going to put up the piece of molding. I like to work towards an outside corner if I possibly can because I can cut those pieces a little bit long and test the joints before I nail them in place. If I don't have an outside corner, the next thing I would look for would be a long wall that's going to have a splice in it. Now, when you're splicing crown molding, you really don't want to splice a piece that's any shorter than this piece. It's about 32 inches long. So if you have to splice crown molding, always use a piece that's at least 32 inches long. If I'm working in a room and I don't have an outside corner, and I don't have a wall that's going to have a splice, then the next thing I want to think about is which wall will be the least visible wall, and I'd probably want to plan to finish up on that least visible wall. Just, gives you the most forgiveness at the end. Okay, a couple other things that we need to do before we're ready to put up any crown molding. The first one is we're going to go around and pop a chalk line around the room that is the bottom of the crown molding, and that's going to give us kind of a guide while we're nailing up the crown molding. There may be some up and down spots in the ceiling. There may even be some in and out spots in the wall. And popping that chalk line is going to help us notice that. You have to pay attention when you pop the line and just see if it's making good contact with the wall everywhere. If not, there may be an in or an out, and that can tend to make your crown molding go up or down, so you don't want that. Then the other thing that you need to know is we're going to add a furring strip right up there where the wall and the ceiling meet, and that's going to provide some extra lumber for us to nail the crown molding off to. We will be nailing through the bottom edge of the crown into the studs that are in the wall. We'll try to find those studs. Well, you could buy a stud finder, but what I like to do is just take a nail and drive a hole in the sheetrock above the chalk line to find the studs. And this is kind of a tip. Most of the time, if I'm a right-handed electrician and I'm nailing that box off, the stud's going to be on the left-hand side of the box. Once you find one of those studs, they're normally on 16-inch centers down the wall, or they might be on 24-inch centers. If you happen to be living in an old house that's got plaster, you're probably going to have to mount that furring strip and do most of your nailing into that furring strip, and you may even want to have a little bit bigger furring strip so that you can take care of that. Well, we're just about ready to get started. We just need to go cut some furring strips, pop some chalk lines, and then we'll be ready to cut and install some crown.